I'm Rebecca King Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Sean Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance.
Today on Conversations on Dance, we welcome back Phil Chan, author and co-founder of Final Bow for Yellowface. Back in May of 2023, in episode 339, we had Phil on the podcast with Doug Fullington and Sarah Wroth to tell us about how the idea for Star on the Rise, Bayadère Reimagined came about, and what made Indiana University a great place to mount this production. Now, following the premiere, Phil joins us again to tell us about the finished product and what the reactions have been. We are thrilled to share that Star on the Rise is now streaming on IU's website. Click the link in the description of this episode to watch now for free.
Phil, it's so wonderful to have you back on the podcast. We love having you on. I think is this your third or fourth time? You're a frequent flyer at this point.
Who's counting?
So.
I get a free smoothie if I get 10.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to have you back on the podcast to talk about the work you just did for Star on the Rise, Bayadère Reimagined. But maybe you can circle back and for any of our listeners that haven't had a chance to be introduced to you through previous episodes, just hear about some of the work you do in our field and how it's gotten to this point where you took this huge Bayadère project off the ground.
Sure. So this work really started with a conversation with the artistic director, Peter Martins, at New York City Ballet. And it was a conversation around how do we better portray Asian people in Bao and Jean's Nutcracker. This was a quick meeting in 2017. My good friend Gina Paskogan passed him my phone number during a diversity committee meeting and was like, talk to Phil. He knows the ballet, but also can speak to the lived experience of being Chinese in America and the minority, and can speak to the impact of this dance. Peter and I met. We talked about the history of Asian people on our stages in opera and theater and ballet, movies, film, television, etc., but also the history of ballet as an art form and the history of the Nutcracker itself. And just seeing that there were opportunities for better representations of non-European cultures. So from that conversation, Peter decided to make some subtle changes to the makeup, choreography, and costuming. So I called Gina and I said, I think Peter Martins is going to change the Nutcracker. And so we decided that here was this moment where the whole ballet world was saying, yes, diversity, equity, inclusion. We want non-white folks to come in and feel included. Yet here we are doing like Ching Chang Chong, like here's like a caricature of your heritage and culture. Like those two things don't work. And so we bought yellowface.org. We put up a simple pledge that says, I love ballet. I want it to be bigger and I'm not going to do yellowface on its stages. So at this point, since 2017, pretty much every major American ballet company has signed the pledge. A lot of the European companies are having this conversation right now about how to handle these questions. And I think all of my work really revolves around this idea of we are taking this Eurocentric art form for Europeans by Europeans. And we now have to make it a global art form, which includes all of us Americans, including white folks who are not Europeans in America, right? This work is also not for you unless we make it bigger. And so that's the sort of the big crux of my work as a writer, as an advocate, and then now like working on this ballet. So with Bayadère specifically, we have this issue where, it's from 1877. It's Europe, European views of this exotic culture that are really nothing Indian about it, right? Like the story's not Indian. Like no Indian person would be like, yeah, that's like a legend in our culture. Like, nope, the like names are not Indian. There were no Indian musical motifs or musical instruments, no Indian collaborators, no Indian choreography. It's all made up. So literally nothing about India is Indian except the like fantasy location that also happens to be a real place called India that we know of. So it was just a different time, and it was really exciting because you could use this exotic place to like do crazy stories and do things where people are like borderline crazy. I mean, like Nikia almost stabs a princess. Like no good German girl would do anything crazy like that, right? And so it was a hit. It still has beautiful choreography, really great music, but like it contains some problematic elements, right? We can't do it the way it's always been done, right? Which includes usually blackface, still to this day in some Russian, Eastern European companies, and like Korea, weirdly enough. I mean, like it's all backwards, but they're coming from this Russian tradition, right? So, and then, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say Paris Opera was doing blackface in it as recently as 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think Benjamin Millepied is the one to credit for that, like really
Yeah.
pushing that. But it wasn't received. People were like, "This is literally a
Changing.
part of our heritage. Like, you can't do that." And so there was even pushback about that.
Hmm.
Bayadère also depicts like Hindus sort of crawling around on the floor like cavemen, and sort of like this Buddhist Hindu like whatever window dressing. And you can't say like to my neighbor Mrs. Singh, like, "Hey, Mrs. Singh, drop your kids off at ballet school, come join the board, come be a donor, come buy a subscription." But like here, look at us, like it's a whole company of white folks dressed running around in a turban, like, and it doesn't
Right.
like it that doesn't work that way. So
Mm-hmm.
what do we do? And I think a lot of folks are like, well, we can't do it anymore. We have to cancel it. We cancel Bayadère. And like, I don't think that's the way either, because there is heritage and tradition. Someone who's interested in pushing the boundaries forward, we need to know where we came from. And this experience with IU at Indiana University, like restaging it, just taught me so much about like craft and being able to live inside these steps from a structural point of view. It's like really mind blowing, like what some of this stuff actually is and is worth saving. So the question then is like, how do we do it in a non-racist way? And we see Shakespearean plays that are sort of using the same words but set in a different place, and opera does this all the time. So like, why is it so hard to imagine Bayadère done without a turban? And so that's what we were trying to do. And so partnered with the incredible Doug Fullington, who was here last time, with Sarah Wroth, who is the chair of the Indiana University ballet department. And we went back to the earliest notation that we could find. So it was around the turn of the 20th century for this production. And so a lot of the productions we know of today are from like a 1940s Soviet version. So it cut a lot of the character dances, the tempos got slower. Like it's just a different work than the original. And so we wanted to go back to see what was that original dance. And then we found a congruent setting where we could keep the dances, but tell sort of a new story and make it about us instead of them. So it takes place in the 1920s Hollywood soundstage. It's the golden age of the movie musical, and they're shooting a cowboy picture. And so there's references to Singing in the Rain and Busby Berkeley and silent movies and melodrama, but also slapstick. And it's all the Pettipas dances. The parts that we didn't have, we filled in with our own choreography. So things that fit the characters or things in a Petipas style that worked. But it's a new work. We're not pretending it's La Bayadère. It has a new title, Star on the Rise. It just happens to be the same notated source as La Bayadère, which takes place in exotic fantasy India. Ours takes place as with American cowboys, so very different.
I want to rewind for a minute, because I feel like the first time we ever had you on, which has been years ago now, you told us, I think maybe after we finished recording, and you were like, I have this thing that I'm going to try to do. I'm working with Doug Fullington. I don't know if it's going to come to fruition. And so I just wonder if you could take us through a little bit of that process, like from when the idea happened, because it's been so long that you've kind of had this in process, and then to the fact that like you just last time we talked to you, you're like, it's like my baby was just born, like this whole process through to the performance just recently.
Yeah, it took 6 years. And that was, I think the initial idea was really coming from this place of love and saying, how do we save this work? You see the writing on the wall that like logically it just like it's not going to work this way anymore. Like we can't just pretend that it's going to work this way and figure it out and cut corners, or like bring in an Indian person for like that doesn't work because it's not about India anyway. So like, like it's lovely that you want to be more culturally authentic, but that's not it. You might as well set it in Scotland or like Argentina. Like it's just as real, and so, wanting to avoid that and just saying like, well, what else could it be? Can we imagine anything bigger? Like Nutcracker. How many versions of Nutcracker are there? As many as every little dance school in America has a Nutcracker. Why can't we imagine more than one version of Bayadère, right? So that's where this thinking was. And Doug once, it was just such a sweet gesture. When I was doing this final bow work initially and sort of struggling with like this concept of the original, he sent me a video of Angelica Generosa of doing the original Chinese tea divertissement. And it's for, he did it with 6 dancers, but I think it was originally like there were 2 more couples, but just to get an idea of what it was. And it was not caricatured at all. It was just like beautiful. And there was partnering and it was aerobic and it was charming and just like not not Yellowface, not character. It just looked like a fun divert.
Right.
And
Mhm.
it was just such a gift from Doug. And so when I was thinking about how do we save Bayadère, it just like made sense that like Doug was this open-minded person who had a deep knowledge and respect of history and the craft of it, would not be just bastardizing it, and
Mhm.
really is a purist in terms of really wanting to see what it was, and just but make sure to do it in a style that works for who we are today,
Mhm.
both physically in the body, but also how we present the work. And I'm just very lucky. There's like very few people who read the Stepanov notation, and like, it's
Right.
just, and he is so meticulously prepared and detailed in what he does. Like, he comes into rehearsal and he spent hours going over the notes and making sure that it's like he knows it inside and out. And yes, it's coupe front, not coupe back, and it's like, but you do this, but
Cool.
you do this, and like it's on and four, not four. Like he's just is such this just really ingrains the work into himself, and you see this music notes on paper, these like weird scribbles. Suddenly it like comes through Doug and like manifests into this like, he's like this sorcerer's stone, like this alchemist.
That's
it's
cool.
it's he's just brilliant. And we also worked with a man named Larry Moore, who's an early musical specialist. He sort of reorchestrated this in a Robert Russell Bennett style, which is sort of this like Cole Porter, Gershwin, like that kind of movie musical era.
Mm-hmm.
And so took the Minkus score and like made it sound American. So there's like cowbell and triangle and banjo and
Oh.
fiddle, and it's like it's so textured and rich and builds. And what most people don't think of is like what we have as the score from Bayadère. It's really a piano reduction and a two violin score, because they used to rehearse with two violins in the studios. So that's all we have. The full like which instrument played what part in the tunes, that orchestration is only in the Mariinsky, and like nobody gets in or out, especially not now with what's
Mm-hmm.
happening. So
Sure.
like the Lanchberry arrangement of that is most heard is like one person's idea of what this piano and violin like little fragments could sound like.
Right.
And so we just went back to that source and said, well, here's what's happening in this part of the music. This is what the character's doing. This is the speed. And Larry was like, oh, that's got to be a Charleston. Oh, that's got to be a tango. Oh, that's got, and like,
Oh, how good.
so just made it so rich in terms of coloring, and it sounds like a big band score, like in shades.
Mm-hmm.
It comes down and it's like glittering xylophone and piano and harp, and it's just like magic.
Oh.
And it's it sparkles in a different way, and that there should be room for in ballet. Like that, this should also be an option for us to see it this way. And it's also it's a comedy. Like people laugh, like the audience claps along. It feels like a Broadway show. Um,
Fun.
and someone on the blogs was writing about. They were like, well, if you like Broadway shows, you're really going to enjoy that. But I like ballet, and it's like, okay, so like basically, I don't want to. I don't expect to have fun
So you hate
as if like
fun.
right, like basically. And like that's too bad, because ballet has historically always included fun. I
Yeah.
mean, it's entertainment. It's like people don't want to go to get depressed. We want to go and have a good time.
Right.
And
That's
this
so
melodrama, it's right on the verge, like melodrama and comedy. It's like right on this fine line. So yeah.
Oh.
Mhm. Why was IU an ideal partner for this project? And how did you even go about making an initial connection?
Yeah, I was giving a talk there during COVID. So it was like a Zoom lecture to their ballet students, and brought up this idea of this like Bayadère, crazy Bayadère reimagining, and like cowboys. And Sarah Wroth, who is the chair of the department, was listening in on the lecture and was like, oh, like who's producing that version? That sounds really cool. And I was like, oh, like we're still shopping it around. It was like during COVID, like no one has money to do a full length right now. Like,
Mhm.
and she's like, oh, like great, like that sounds great. We'll do it. And I was like, excuse me? And she was like, yeah, no, like it's great. It would be a great experience for the students. And I think IU has done a lot of like triple bills to really give the diversity for their students to try a lot of different styles, but
Mhm.
giving them the experience once in a while, besides Nutcracker, to do a full length is just a really special gem. So and this was a work that I think Sarah had danced at Boston Ballet, had a lot of emotional attachment to. but knew that it was problematic the way it's done, and so just really wanted to be able to give that experience to her students. And it was incredible. They have one big building. I mean, Michael, you've been there to stage ballet. It's like one giant building, and the orchestra's there, and the set shop's there, and the ballet studios are there, and it's like an old European opera house. And you like, if you need something to happen, you just go down the hall, and like there's the other department, and or like the costume department's right there, and so just to be able to and they all work together all the time. So they're like, okay, they just did Sweeney Todd right before us, and then they did whatever, just like the next opera, the next play, the next show. And so they just are used to churning out shows. So it just seemed like, for this sort of trial concept run, just a really great place. I mean, even things like, oh, can we have a fog machine? They were like, oh yeah, we have like 5 in the basement. Like, what sides? Like, what do you want? Both sides? Just one side? Up, down?
Amazing.
Like, projections? Like, what do you need? And they just like, because they do so many shows, so it just seemed like a place that would put resources into trying this out, and also be a place for us to really experiment, because we didn't know what we were doing really going into it either. And so to be able to work with students who are open-minded and game to try this new way of doing it, was just such an incredible experience.
I want to mention
that.
Yeah, that the last time we had you on, Sarah Wroth was on and Doug Fullington was on with you. And I'm going to link that episode, because I think if people haven't listened to it, they can go back. And when we talked to you guys, you were just about, as I recall, to start going into the studio, right? You were all prepared and you were like just about to get started. So I wonder how the process unfolded from the expectation of what was going to happen, and then how it kind of evolved while you were in the studios.
Yeah, I mean, I have to credit Doug here again. He is so meticulously organized. We had 11 weeks, and he mapped out every week, like how many hours of rehearsal, who needs what, because we had 3 casts. It's 80 dancers, 20 children. And like Doug used to do this at PNB. So he was like, we cannot monkey around. Like we gotta set these dances. I need to know how many hours I have with the ranchers. You have half an hour with the mini mantas on Saturday. Like, that like all that shuffle was really what kept us on task. And and it just sort of snuck up on us. Like Doug was in one studio staging a lot of the sort of dances for notation. I was in the other room translating the mime script into gestures that would have made sense to a contemporary audience. So, for example, in the original Bayadère, Solar he raises his right arm and he puts 2 fingers in the air, and it sort of almost looks like a Heil Hitler, if you're like sitting in the 4th ring, and like, what's he doing? And like, I don't know what that means if you're an audience member today who's not like one of the 50 people who studied ballet mime, and you don't know what that means. And then you're sitting there and you're like, gosh, everyone else in the audience seems to be totally cool. Maybe I'm the idiot. Oh my God. Now I've just worried about it. Now I don't know what's going on. Ballet's not for me because I'm too dumb, obviously. And then you leave during intermission and you're flustered, when literally all you have to do is make the character get down on one knee and open a box. And the girl, gets all flustered and excited and runs down and grabs him and kisses his face. That's all you need to do. Like
proposal.
And yeah, that's it. That's all it is. So finding ways to have those gestures, and even like the sort of famous 2 rivals scene between the sort of cat fight between Nikia and Gamzati. Like, okay, so how do we do it where like one person's literally not stabbing the other person, and like but like how do we get that feeling of violence and establishing what the power hierarchy is in that scene? And so playing with that in a new way, because we don't really know what those mime passages look like either. We just sort of know what's supposed to happen with the music that's written, right. So the feelings are all there. So that was a lot of fun for me to play with in the studio. And then it sort of builds, and you put an act together, and then you put a scene together, and then we're running the show every day. And then, it just sort of builds in a really organic way that sort of creeps up on you. But yeah, it was 11 weeks in Bloomington, Indiana. That was a long time. I miss being home.
Oh yeah. Wow. Oh, wow. Could you tell us a little bit about the casting process and maybe some highlights of what the dancers brought to their individual roles, in particular, as the production is evolving and you're making something that is more 21st century?
Yeah. It was so interesting because we went out the December before we started working with them in late January to do just a week of sort of workshops where we staged some of the shades variations, sort of our dreamland variations, a couple of the male solo parts, just to like get a feel. And we did some of the sort of core work already, just to get a feel like, okay, how would this work? Who's up for it? It's also interesting because it's a college setting. You have to give some degree of seniority. Like, okay, here are the seniors. These are the ones who are doing the principal roles, because everyone's sort of been like waiting to get a chance. And it's not like, well, this is the best dancer, they have to do. There's a little bit of some egalitarian, like, oh, she got a principal role in the last show, so we need to give someone else a chance. And there's sort of enough to go around, and so it's about creating that learning experience. So who needs this to sort of be pushed to the next level? Who would really shine in this part? And so what's lovely about Bayadère is there were so many sort of big parts. There's like a lot of dancing in the ballet. So like, and you also, every dancer learned a different track as well. So you're doing multiple roles in multiple shows. So everyone really got sort of the chance to try a little bit of everything, which is sort of a real professional experience. I really loved working with the principals in the mime scenes, because they all brought so much to it. And it's really a lot asking students of that age, who are still figuring out who they are as people, to be vulnerable and to pretend to be someone that they're not. Like, it's like, almost if you're like not moored in who the strength and conviction of who you are as a person, it's hard to be somebody else. And so as they're fluid, it's sort of like they're trying it out, and to see them grow and evolve and sort of deepen these characters. I mean, my favorite character, I think, in the show is our Gamzati character, or Pamela Zati. We lovingly call her Pam, even though in real life she would never let you call her Pam. It's always Pamela, but we lovingly called her Pam. She's this sort of Norma Desmond insecure diva who's the star of the silver screen, and she's sort of feeling her age, and she's clinging on to this younger man to try to keep her career going. And she's seen it before. She's seen all these young upstarts before, and she's, it's a man's world. She's got to do what she's got to do to stay working. And her character, her transformation, she's the villain, but she's also, you sort of love her, and you have a soft spot for her, and by the end you're almost rooting for her in a way that is I think maybe unusual in classical ballet, that you have this sort of depth of how you can feel a character, and you just want to hate her and love her at the same time. She's great. She gets to throw a temper tantrum. She gets to be, a raging, just everything in between, vulnerable, and a lot of fun dancing too. So I don't know. And that really came out from the students, just finding these characters. One more thing, I just have to give them credit. Those cowboys, man, these are like the fakirs who crawled around on the floor in front of the fire. And it was like, what if we had these like cowboys that were just like big, goofy golden retriever, like Ken dolls, and they sort of moved as one unit. It was sort of like the prodigal son, like, like monsters, but like the lovable inverse of them. And like they just filled up the scenes, and you could just watch them the whole ballet, because they're always doing something funny and charming and sweet, and they're just so lovable. And that really came from the students, and the sort of supportive environment that they have there, where they're really rooting for each other. And so these lovable cowboys from these like really gross Indian people, that were fantasy Indian people crawling on the floor, to these like lovable characters. It's a glow up, and we have the students to thank for it.
I wonder how else you found a benefit working with students, as opposed to if you had done this in a professional environment. You've already talked about, they offered you many resources. You had the costume department that worked with the music backstage, but how is like that student feel something that maybe not only was a huge benefit to the project, but also maybe influenced, other than you're talking about the cowboys? Like, were there other instances too?
Yeah, I think in general, like, there's this feeling of, when you're in a professional setting, like, I'm in the space, you're in the front of the room, and you give me the step, and I do the step as best I can. Like, and then I go home and like I have dinner, like, and then I come back and we do it tomorrow. That's the agreement. So like you just tell me how you want me to do it. And like, whereas this environment is like, they were here to learn. Like, everybody who's doing the mime with me was like, I want to learn how to be better at mime, so I'm going to play. I'm going to
Oh.
experiment. I'm going to see what works for my body and really look at my face and see what works. Whereas a professional might say like, well, like, was that too much? Like,
Right.
was that enough? Or like, okay, great. Because like I have another rehearsal. I'm doing like 4 other ballets. Like, do you want more? Did I laugh in the right place? And it's or like, where do you want my hand?
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Like, and whereas the students were like, well, it wouldn't make sense for her to hold in this hand, so I should try it in this hand, because then and like they're much more game to play.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's it's not that professionals don't want to work that way. It's just that we're so pressed for time, and
Or
like,
they almost like scared. Like sometimes, like when you're kind of scared for your job in a way, like you don't want to have that
stick
back and
out
forth
and
with the
all
front
that.
of the room in the same way, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it is,
Yeah.
but I mean, I don't think it's a lack of artistry. I think it's
Right.
it's like time and just how that's not how we do it. And so in this process where there wasn't someone saying, well, the ballet police says you can't do it that way, you know,
Mhm.
we were much more free to try and
That's
play.
cool.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I also feel like it's possible you would have run into more resistance because, people at that, if you're professionals, you might have performed like a more 19th century traditional quote unquote version of the ballet. I'm just thinking of when I was in Dresden and they were performing this new modern Swan Lake, and it was really, I think, emotionally difficult for the dancers because it was very, very different, like just totally different story. And you hear this gorgeous music and you think, well, this is the moment that I would be doing this in the original version, and now I'm in like a socks and like a ski mask or something doing modern steps. But to
Right.
me, I found it really, I loved the production and I found it really interesting, and I'm grateful for both. But I think you having students that are like not only just by the nature of being a student, but also they're literally taking classes where they're learning about the history of these things. Professionals are often skipping that step. Maybe you just get into a ballet company from a ballet school, but I like that like these are more academically oriented minds to begin with. So I think you probably got people that were more open to the whole experience of creating something new.
Absolutely. And I think you're also touching on a nerve there about this idea of change and like new productions. We've gotten quite a bit of pushback for people being like, how dare you like change Bayadère, when actually we're like actually going back and restoring some of the things.
Mhm.
Some of the dances that like, we're actually caretaking for it in a different way.
Or like
But
lost.
right. And so but there's this pushback, I think, and it's because I'm trying to really understand from an emotional level, like why people are so angry that they would like write nasty things online because it makes them so mad. And I
Mhm.
think it's actually an inverse of that. I think it comes from a deep place of love. And I think it's a love of the first time they had a really deep emotional arts experience where
Mhm.
they saw a show, like it was so moving to them that their first Swan Lake or their first Madame Butterfly. And even if it's not that cast, and even if it's not that production, if it's in that same style, in that
Right.
same universe, they can be transported back to that same, to touch on that same special moment when they fell in love with that work. And when you do something radical and change it, you're not giving people that chance to do that. Then they're forced to come up against a new way of looking at it, a new way of appreciating it. Maybe things push back against something that might not have been great in their original production. It just like it's a lot of things, and there is comfort in seeing the same thing over and over again. I mean, that's why we
Mhm.
watch The Wizard of Oz at Christmas or Thanksgiving every year. There's a reason why you go see Wicked on tour in any city in the world, and it's the same show that's playing on Broadway, and even like the inflections that Kristen Chenoweth did. And Indina Menzel, like you will find performers who do it exactly that way because
Mhm.
we like this franchised performance because we want to hold on to that experience. But um, that's not always how it works. Like, we could do that with museums and movies and sculpture and film, but
Mhm.
not with dance.
I think your
Live art.
argument about Nutcracker is just like makes so much sense. There are so many versions of the Nutcracker, and I don't think anyone's upset when they see a different version. It's just like seeing something different. So I just think that really rings true, at least to me, I think.
Phil, could you tell us a little bit about what audience reaction was? I mean, of course, there are always going to be the naysayers, the people who are resisting any change to tradition, but I'm sure that you had a really positive impact on the many viewers that did show up to see the premiere.
Yeah, we had a great turnout at the premiere. It was also screened live at Lincoln Center at the New York Public Library, so that was awesome. So we had like a New York crowd, and Larry wasn't able to the man who orchestrated the Minkus score wasn't able to make it to Indiana, so he was there with Gina interviewing him before the show. So we got sort of a New York crowd there. It was also live streamed everywhere for free, so that was also cool that we had folks all over the world tuning in. And it'll actually be released for free on IU's website, so anybody can go and just watch it and see for themselves what we were talking about. Um, but yeah, the response so far, I mean, some people loved it, some people really hated it, not their thing, but like that's also fine.
Yeah.
But what really I think touched me the most is like we had a Wednesday school show that we did before the premiere, and we just did like some of the dances, and like they did the shades variations, but then we did the sort of dance of the Hindus, which in our version was the Bronco Busters. It's maybe folks who are listening, like it's sort of like a wild Hindu dance, and there's a drummer who throws the drum around, and it's almost like a sort of a can burlesque big number. And they're usually like in brown face and like shirtless, and it's wild. And so in our version, they're like it's the dance for the lovable cowboys, and so
Mhm.
they're wearing bovine fringe sequin chaps. It's like high kicks. It's so much fun, and you go out there for like 1,000 third graders, and you're like, all right, the shades variations wasn't that pretty. Now who wants to see some cowboys? And they all just screaming,
Oh.
like at school shows. But then they're watching it and they're clapping along with the music, and like they're like having such a good time. It's like, guys, this is ballet, and here's like third graders at the edge of their seats clapping along to ballet, like because who doesn't love dancing cowboys? And it's petty pie,
Right.
like it's so great.
Mhm.
And we had so many children. People brought their families, and like Bayadère is like not really like a kids show.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's like kind of boring if you're like
Yeah.
5.
Yeah.
This was a riot. It was fun. It was colorful. It was it just kept things moving. It was over the top and
Mm.
campy. And so yeah, that's I think it's just we had a bigger audience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think we need in ballet. We can't have small stories. We have to think bigger. They have to be bigger.
That's another great point that in addition to the other work that you're doing, by bringing something that kids can identify with a little bit more. Everybody knows a cowboy, right? So something that could bring in a new generation of viewers in so many different ways is just so exciting. And I wonder, do we know yet if it's going to have another life, if there are presenters that are listening and want to get in touch? How are we what's going on there?
We have 2 major presenters who are already said, if you guys have a professional company, we want it. We want to do it. We are talking to a few professional companies who are like, how can we afford this? Because
Mm,
an executive director of a ballet company said to me, "Listen, it is so hard for me to sell Giselle, right?
Mhm.
Like it's a masterpiece. We need to have it as part of our campaign. It's so hard for me to sell that. Like look at the picture. She's just like a dead woman,
Right.
or like some Bavarian peasant. Like that's hard sell. But listen, put a leggy girl in a cowboy hat, like that sells tickets, and
mhm.
that's let's make it bigger. Let's get
Mhm.
new audiences. We need to sell tickets. This is a show. It's a show that's fun. Like so, people are paying attention.
Well, and I remember too, like when we were at Miami City Ballet, like we would do the full lengths, and a lot of times it'd be because board members would be like, "We want sets and costumes," or like that's like one of the things that was of interest. So here you go, here's sets and costumes, something that's exciting for the dancers, that has a great story to it. It's all there. All the makings are there.
Also, there's another reason why we have to do it again, and this is like my fangirling, but Kira Nichols is on faculty at IU. Her mother, Sally Streets, who is still alive, still teaching ballet, was one of my first ballet teachers in the United States. Um, and so, Kira is also like a Berkeley girl. And so I, just grew up idolizing her. And so she actually we created the part of Mad Gavin, who's the sort of choreographer character who, in this version, sort of like the lilac fairy who sort of sews all the pieces together and gives everyone a happy ending. But in the traditional version, sort of like the slave who crawls around on the floor and like does what the Maharaja tells him to. So, but just the chance to get to work with someone of that caliber, and she still got it. Like she walks in a room and she just like floats through the mime, and you're like, it's so clear, and it's like, some people you're like, oh, that like that's the special one. Like,
Yeah.
she walks into a room and you're like, oh yes, that.
That's
And
fair.
man, she has got that star power. And so we made this role on her. And unfortunately, she tore her calf right before the premiere, and so was not able to do it. So I'm like hoping that, we get a professional company, and I'll say like, and can we please let Kira do it with us? Because what the other thing about this is there's a great role for both a principal character male and a principal character female who are like, probably like a beloved former prima of the company.
Mm-hmm.
They could just walk into these roles, and it's just like they're tailored to be these really dramatic, powerful roles. So it's nice that we're also we want to make these intergenerational parts. But also my favorite character too is our costume designer, who is played by Beatrice B, who was like, I believe 6, and she sort of was like this Edna Mode character that was the shortest person, but like obviously everybody respected and was just bossing everyone around. So it was funny to work with like very, very small people as well.
So fun.
As well as very experienced, performers.
Right.
So just that whole range was just made it feel alive too. So it wasn't just like, here's ballet students wearing wigs to look like old people.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like such an incredible journey, and we hope that we are able to have the experience of seeing it in a theater, but super looking forward to just streaming it on IU's website. So as soon as that comes up, we will absolutely share with our listeners, and we hope that everyone will take the time to give it a stream.
Great. Would love to mention our 10,000 Dreams with the Asian choreographers.
Yes, we were going to talk about that. Thanks for reminding us. Please do.
So I just got back from Minneapolis, where we did our first 10,000 Dreams choreography festival, like live in person with Washington Ballet, Oakland Ballet, and Ballet Met. And it was really special. We did a mix of pieces that were both works by Chu Sang-go as well as works that were commissioned during COVID. So after this like shooting in Atlanta, all these ballet companies were like, how do we support more Asian artists? And I said, well, maybe hire Asian choreographers, and many companies had hired 0, maybe 1, like either Chu Sang-go or Ed Liang, but like not really, but had all these depictions of Asian people, Nutcracker, Bayadère, Corsair, all these like, Orientals on stage, but no Asian talent. And so a few of those pieces that on this program got commissioned in this process of saying to ballet companies, well, how do we connect you with Asian talent? So we hosted this virtual festival during COVID where we spotlighted different Asian artists every single day during the month of May. So 31 different choreographers. Out of that, 5 commissions got made. 4 of them were women. So also bridging the gender gap for choreographers. And so Minneapolis at the Northrop was our first sort of iteration of this in person. We're also taking this to the Kennedy Center in June, where we have a full week, including a film festival outdoors for free. And we actually just announced our gala, which will be in honor of Chu Sang-go, who is a trailblazing Asian American choreographer. But Singapore Ballet and the National Ballet of China will be coming on our gala program. And it would have been his 75th birthday this past year. So it's a way to honor his work. And I'm especially excited to see the last work he made before he passed, called Ballade, which one of his dreams was to have his choreography done on a Chinese company, because that was his heritage, and it didn't happen during his lifetime. So we arranged for the National Ballet of China to take it into their repertory and perform it. So sort of realizing one of his dreams too. And he's a great American choreographer. He was the same age as I was right now when he passed away of AIDS. And so just to be able to, as a gay Asian man, to like recognize this trailblazer and revive some of his work and have people take a second look at it is just really meaningful. And so we have this arc of like, it was just this conversation about like, how do we not do a racist Nutcracker, to how do we open doors for Asian artists to really be a part of this art form? And so it's how do we make new work? How do we reinterpret the old work to be more inclusive? And so it's been kind of a wild ride.
Great work that you're doing.
Such a cool project. So amazing. Yeah, we hope for all of our listeners in DC will come and check it out. Kennedy Center, a whole week at the Kennedy Center. That's amazing.
I know. It's a lot of dancers. But it's Ballet West, Pacific Northwest Ballet, Houston Ballet, Washington Ballet, Dana Tysoon Burgess, and Singapore Ballet and National Ballet of China. So a full week of all of that.
And that's just so amazing for the dancers. I feel like maybe these things have been, well, I think even before COVID, it's felt less frequent. But, like anytime Rebecca and I had that opportunity where you were at some sort of festival or there were other companies, it's just such an important experience for the dancers that they're going to get to have. So it's such a cool project. Yeah.
You get to see what everybody's up to and what their work looks like and just get to talk informally. Like it was really great. After our shows at the Northrop, we were just like all hanging out at the hotel bar, like after the show, just talking and being like, what's your deal? What's your vibe? What's going on? Oh my God. And also Gina will kill me because she is also on the program at the Kennedy Center. So also all of those companies and Gina.
And Gina. Just Gina. Can you imagine?
So
you leave out your best.
It's literally she's doing a solo, so it is just Gina.
Mm-hmm.
Just Gina Pascogan. We love it.
Yeah.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for coming back on. I feel like we've tracked this whole journey with you on the podcast. So it's so fun. And so when the first company picks it up, we'll have to talk about it again.
Great. We'll see you at the show.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, folks.
Conversations on Dance is part of the ACAST Creator Network. For more information, visit conversationsondancepod.com.